Should you buy a condo? So I want to go ahead and explain why you should never ever buy a condo. And this is coming from someone who has in the past bought in a condo, lived in there as a primary residence, and then later on sold the condo for a profit. So even with me selling the condo for a profit and it yielding, a decent return, I still have the idea that you should never buy a condo. So I want to go ahead and explain the reasons why. So one of the things that, I ended up doing when I was looking into buying a condo is I was searching all over Google, I was going all over YouTube, and little did I know that I was suffering from confirmation bias because everywhere I read, there was red flags about the condo of purchasing a condo, both from the perspective of an investment and a primary residence. And I just ignored the red flags, just kind of like a bad relationship, but the person looks really good. You're going to ignore the flags, right? And so that's exactly what happened to me when I was looking to buy a condo. And I saw a small clip of Dave Ramsey saying, yeah, they could be decent investments sometimes. And that was enough for me to really have that confirmation bias and pull the trigger into buying a condo. However, I want you guys to learn from my mistake. It's always good to learn from your mistakes, but it's better to learn from someone else's mistakes. So I want to go ahead and highlight a few things right now. Again, this is going to be broken down in two sections. One, from the perspective of an investor, and then two, from the perspective of someone who's going to live in a condo as a primary residence, right? And even if you're going to live in there from, as a primary residence, I still think you should consider the ideas of like it also being an investment, because I think real estate is always, just a great investment, even if it's your primary residence. So I want to go ahead and break down a couple of things. Starting from the perspective of an investor, I want to go ahead and break down the number one reason that really hurts the appeal of buying and owning a condo as an investment property, and that is the high HOA fees, right? The fees are just absurdly high. And one of the things that I experienced is that the HOA fees were nearly half of what I was paying for the actual mortgage of the condo. Actually, a little bit more than half, right? And at the time, I was paying $500. Now, I know some individuals may say, well, $500 is not a lot for HOA fees. Consider the fact that I was paying $900 for the mortgage, so the HOA was more than half of the mortgage. And at the same time, when I was paying $500 a month just in the HOA fees, I had family members that lived in houses that were from $1 to $3 million in price range, and they had way more amenities, and their HOA fees were nearly half or less, right? I know family members who lived in $2 million houses who paid probably like $250 a month in HOA fees. And this is with, security guards, roaming around the premises all the time, 24 hours, right? Gated community, golf course, basketball court, gym, pool, spa, deer frolicking around, and they only paid $250 a month versus me living in a small condo at a small fraction of the price of $1 million home, and I was paying more in HOA fees. And so this hurts you as an investor because this kills the cash flow, right? If you're gonna have a tenant live in the condo, and even if you're gonna live, in the condo as a primary residence, let's say in the future you want to get rid of it but you don't want to sell it, if you bring a tenant into the condo, it's severely hard to just break even, just because when you factor into the math, the mortgage and the HOAs and what you're charging from rent, it barely makes sense. Now, the second reason why you don't want to buy a condo from the perspective of an investor is simply because condos tend to depreciate at a faster rate than single family homes. Now, the reason this happens, right, is simply because of supply and demand. There is less demand for a condo than there is for a single family home. And so since there's less demand, there's less liquidity. And when there's less liquidity, that means that the price is gonna fluctuate at a much, rapid rate, right? And so why is there less, demand for a condo? Well, here's the thing. You have to think of who is interested in buying a condo and who's interested in buying a single family home. Well, for a single family home, it's nearly every single person, right? Obviously, especially if you're gonna have a family, you don't wanna live in a little condo. You wanna have your own house, so you could have a barbecue, you could do your own things, or you're growing a family, or you have a family. A condo typically is going to be someone who is much more older, or they're probably downsizing from a house, or someone like me who was just a young stupid hotshot who wanted to move into a condo downtown, and that's just pretty much the demographic. It's not really a place for families to grow, and obviously families are going to be the bigger majority of individuals purchasing real estate. So the demand is simply not there, and that's the reason why condos will tend to depreciate at a much faster rate than a single family home, especially during a recession. Condos are going to fall down so much more faster, because in a recession, who wants to live in a condo when you can have more space in the house and more privacy? Now, the third reason why you do not want to buy a condo from the perspective of an investor is because lenders tend to be much more, limited and restricted when it comes to financing of a condo, and this could severely hurt you when you're trying to either get rid of the condo or even refinance the condo, right? And the reason is because they have this rule where if there's too many renters, occupying the whole facility or, the whole condo association, well, then lenders tend to not want to really do or provide mortgages, right? And this happened to me when I was trying to get rid of my condo. I had individuals offering full price to purchase my condo, and then the deal kept falling through because regardless if they were doing a VA loan, FHA loan, conventional loan, a lot of the times the lenders looked at the renter occupancy and said, no, I'm not going to finance this. And so I had to wait until I had a cash buyer who would just pay outright cash for the condo. Luckily for me, I was still able to make a profit and exit out, but this is a bad situation. You don't want to have, deals fall through just because lenders are much more restrictive. Terrible for business and for an investment. Now, for those of you guys that made it this far in the video and you're looking to buy a condo, but not from the perspective of an investor, you actually just want to, buy this condo and live in there as your primary residence. Maybe it's cheaper than buying a house. Well, let me go ahead and mention a few things. Now, again, I don't want to change your mind. You should always just do whatever is best for your situation. But here's a couple of things that I realized even for myself when I was living in a condo as a primary residence, right? So one of the things is that a condo is basically an apartment, right? So the whole idea of ownership is pretty much out the window because it's not technically or really there. The illusion is there, but it's really like you're just living in an apartment. And I'm gonna go ahead and explain why. Now, first of all, it's shared living spaces. So just like an apartment, you're gonna hear everything your neighbors do. You're gonna hear the neighbors upstairs, if you have neighbors upstairs, neighbors downstairs, and maybe neighbors on the side, right? Now, maybe your condo has like concrete walls and you won't hear what your neighbors are doing at 3 in the morning. Cool, right? But still, it's still a shared, like a living situation where what happens is, let's say someone on a floor above you, below you, or on the side of you has plumbing problems, right? If someone has a plumbing problem in a household, right, the plumber just comes, they fix that, it doesn't impact the whole neighborhood. Well, in a condo, since it's a shared living space, let's say someone else is having plumbing issues, well, the whole condo association has to, most of the time, shut off all the water pipes for all the units. Sometimes it could just be a unit, nearby, but most of the time it's an entire, condo association. And just because someone else had like clogged pipes in a unit far away from you, it's gonna impact you. I can't tell you how many times I had gotten like a notice on my, door. Sometimes they kind of put it in the mailbox or whatever, saying, hey, on this day, April, yada yada, we're gonna have to shut down the water and this is gonna impact you. I mean, they do give you a heads up in advance. I think it's like either 24 hours or 48 hours. Sometimes it may be a little bit more ahead, depending on the circumstance, but it's still a major inconvenience. I mean, no matter what your lifestyle is, if you're someone who's working, from home, or whatever you do, waking up in the morning and not being able to, brush your teeth or turn on any of the faucets or even flush the toilet is a severe, just annoyance to your daily life. And even though they do give you like the heads up, it's kind of annoying saying, oh, okay, this day I had to change whatever I had planned and go into a completely different household, right? Now, generally they do it early in the morning, probably at 9. Fingers crossed that that's what they do, because sometimes it could be a major incident where they just have to shut off all the water pipes, as an emergency. But most of the time it is at a time where you're probably not going to have guests over, but nonetheless it is annoying. Now, another reason why it sucks to buy a condo even as a primary residence is because just like an apartment, most condos have restrictions on pets. Now, you can have a pet, but they're probably going to charge you, some money monthly or an upfront fee. So in my case, right, and of course it's going to be different, so you should always check with your condo association, but in my case, it's going to be $600 upfront for a cat or a dog, plus a $20 fee, and I think it was much more higher if the pet weighed a certain amount of pounds, right? Now, in my case, I had a little black cat, or a kitten at the time, and I did not want to pay $600 just so I could have a kitten and $20 a month just so I could, have the kitten live in the condo. I thought that was ridiculous. It's like, hey, I own this place. Why do I have to pay this, fee? I could understand in an apartment, they're concerned about, ruining the rug or whatever is, the appliances or whatever. But like, this is a place that you absolutely own, yet most condos are still going to charge you a fee. Now, in my case, I did something that was a little unethical. I pretty much hid my cat like a fugitive. And actually, when I spoke to a lot of the neighbors, this is exactly what they did. It's very hard to tell if you have a dog or a cat. Like, if you don't tell them, they're probably not going to know, but it is unethical, and it's not something I'm suggesting or recommending. But I just thought it was just unethical to charge me $600 plus $20 a month, like basically a bill, just so I could have my little cat who pretty much just goes, on their little cat bed and does nothing all day, But, it is what it is. It's just not going to be the same like when you have a house where you have the freedom. Now, another issue about living in a condo, even as a primary residence, is that oftentimes, right, and I'm going to say probably 99% of the time, any renovations that you do, you have to run it by the condo association, and they have to tell you whether or not you can do it and also what days you can do it. So if you're gonna do the flooring for your condo, maybe you have carpet, maybe you have hardwood flooring and you just want to change it to vinyl, whatever the case may be, right? It's obviously gonna vary. You have to let the condo association know, and number one, they have to tell you you can't do that or you can do that, and if you can do that, they have to tell you, hey, you could only do it this time, and maybe it's gonna be a conflicting time where it doesn't work with your schedule or it doesn't work with the contractor's schedule. It's going to be much more difficult than when you have a house. Hey, as long as it's up to, code, you could pretty much do whatever you want to do in your house, right? If you want to turn your garage into a room and it's up to code, or whatever you want to do in your house, you want to add a chandelier, you can do that. But even adding a fan, right? I wanted to add a fan in the living room, and I had to ask the condo association, hey, can I add this fan here? And they had to give me a set amount of time, and it actually took them a while to really figure out whether or not I can add a fan in the living room. And it was just overall kind of just frustrating, because this is your home, right? Especially your primary residence. This is where you dwell in, this is where after you work hard, you just kind of want to relax in the comfort of your own home, and there's just restrictions that absolutely suck. Now, something else that really bothered me in my condo, and I'm pretty sure this is the case for most condos elsewhere all over the country, is that, if you're gonna have someone move in, you have to tell the condo that you're having someone move in with you, and there may be fees that you have to pay. For example, I was actually in violation of the condo association when at the time, I asked my girlfriend to move in with me, and I thought it was just simple like that. Hey, can she move in with me? And that's it, and that the deal is done. But it's not like that. Maybe when you live in a little single family home, you could do whatever you want. You want to ask someone to live with you? Go ahead, do it. But in a condo, it's different, right? Because there's actually fees you have to pay, and they have to do a background check. So, I was actually in violation. They kind of just sent me an email like, hey, we noticed there's a car parked here. We see someone going in and out all the time. Does this person live with you? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, oh, well, there's, this fee. And I forgot how, it was maybe a couple $100 I had to pay. Plus, you have to pay $75, I think it was, for a background check. Now, in their defense, I get why they do it, right? It's a shared living space. You want to make sure that the people in this living space are safe. They're not dangerous people. They're not people that raise a threat to all the other people living in a community. And I get that, but it is still a little frustrating just because, I grew up, living in a house where if I wanted, let's say, a girlfriend or someone to, move in with me, or a family member to stay with us, it was hassle-free. They just come in and, when they're ready to go, they could go. But in a condo, you have to, get approval, and there's fees for that, right? There's fees for pretty much everything. Now, another reason why living in a condo as a primary residence pretty much sucked, and this may be kind of, petty of me to kind of even mention this, but I thought it was just annoying enough for me to mention, is that when you order, and this is gonna sound silly, when you order takeout food like Uber Eats, DoorDash, or whatever other, app services there are, when you live in a house, it's so much easier to get the food delivered, right? Maybe they may struggle to find your house. I'm sure that's happened to some people there, especially if you have a very complex neighborhood to drive through. But in a condo, like I said, it's basically like an apartment, and pretty much every single time I ordered food, which which was a lot, especially during, you know, the pandemic. At the time when I was living in this condo, I pretty much always had to get out and walk or take the elevator down and meet the person just to get the food, which kind of takes out the convenience of, you know, having food delivered. If that was the case, I should have just, you know, just got out, right? But it just kind of sucks. But again, it's just something petty for me to mention in this video. But overall, can you make money off an investment property being a condo? Yes, if the cash flow is there, it could work. Or in my case, I really didn't rent it out, although I technically had my girlfriend as a tenant, which is what she was labeled as, and, you know, she did pay a portion of the rent. You know, at the end of the day, you know, you just have to make sure that it cash flows well, and I did get to sell it for a profit, so that was a plus for me. But that may not always be the case, especially when you have high HOA fees that really slash the, you know, cash flow, or it's just really hard to really offload the condo because lenders are very restrictive, right? But also from the sense of a primary residence, yeah, it may make sense for some people, right? And it makes sense for someone who doesn't want to deal with maybe the maintenance of a lawn, which if that's really the main concern, you could just hire like a lawn guy for maybe, I don't know, $30, $40 a month. But, you know, some people just don't want to have the hassle of, you know, having to maintain a house, and they just want to live in a small space, and maybe it's in a favorable area. For example, the condo that I purchased was in downtown Orlando, and it was just, you know, the lifestyle that I wanted. I wanted to live in a condo. I didn't want to live in a house. I had this idea. I just wanted to be kind of like a bachelor, and at the time, it was, you know, something that I did enjoy, but I did feel like I mixed business and pleasure, and I was trying to get, you know, something from my primary residence, the same impact as something as an investment property, and you really can't mix the two together. So I definitely understand that now, but even as a primary residence, looking back on it, had I been more smarter, I could have just got a house in the suburbs, and even if I wanted to participate in the nightlife, you could really just like Uber or drive to wherever you're trying to go. You don't have to live exactly downtown, but, you know, we all make mistakes and we all learn from our mistakes, and I'm hoping that this video provides some maybe insight. I'm not trying to change your mind, but I definitely wish that someone made a video that was very straightforward and, you know, just very authentic on their experience, you know, with a condo like this, right? Again, I did have confirmation bias, so maybe even if someone made a video like this, I probably would have ignored it, but, you know, I'm just trying to put this out there so that you guys could be informed. But with that being said, guys, make sure to watch this next video right over here, and I'll see you guys on that next video. Take care, guys.